For every one of us, a particular person comes to mind, someone who set a standard of conduct and made us better by their example. For me, that man is my father, George Romney. It wasn't just that my dad helped write the civil rights provision for the Michigan Constitution, though he did. It wasn't just that he helped create Michigan's first Civil Rights Commission, or that as governor he marched for civil rights on the streets in Detroit, though he did those things too. More than these acts, it was the kind of man he was and the way he dealt with every person, black or white.
Well, that was Mitt Romney's address, or at least part of it, before the NAACP today. He received restrained applause for his comments on his father's legacy, who at times broke party ranks over the issue of civil rights. But it was his comments about Obamacare that drew the loudest reaction.
If our goal is jobs, we have to stop spending over $1 trillion more than we take in every year. And so to do that, I'm going to eliminate every non-essential, expensive program I can find. That includes Obamacare, and I'm going to work to reform and save.
In trying to get African-American votes here, or at least make the margins somewhat more palatable, Romney certainly has got an uphill battle ahead of him. President Obama, he leads Romney among African-Americans, and we all knew the margin would be huge, but 92 to 6%, that according to the latest polls, and no Republican presidential candidate has gotten more than 15 since of the black vote since '64. Dominic, I've heard two arguments on this today. One is, hey, at least he gets points for talking before him, and people say he doesn't get points. This is the largest organization representing African Americans. He should be doing this. What do you think?
I think the fact of the matter is Mr. Romney deserves enormous credit for going in the lion's den, if you will. There was no conceivable, possible way, throw any word in there that you want to, that Mr. Romney was going to receive a warm reception before the NAACP. This is almost before, it's almost like him going to speak to 1,000 Obama supporters. It's just not going to happen. So you have to give the man a lot of credit. But if I wrote the speech, I would have said, Governor, notice they didn't become angry or boo, excuse me, they didn't become angry, they booed, until he used the word Obamacare. So I would have left the health care out of this speech and focused on my dad like he did in terms of his involvement in civil rights. But you got to give Romney enormous credit.
You think it was smart politically to do it?
Yes, it says that he's interested in being a president for all Americans.
All right.
That's what it says.
Now, there is another dimension to the address today, and that it's what it came on the heels of, and that was yesterday's speech from Eric Holder, Attorney General. And Andrew, he made a headline or two with what he said.
In the very same room, Rich, Holder, the first African-American Attorney General, explained his opposition to a new voter ID requirement for Texas voters, likening the new regulations to poll taxes, a fee used in some southern states after the abolition of slavery that served to disenfranchise black people.
Under the proposed law, concealed handgun licenses would be acceptable forms of photo ID. But student IDs would not. Many of those without IDs would have to travel great distances to get them, and some would struggle to pay for the documents they might need to obtain them. We call those poll taxes. We will not allow political pretexts to disenfranchise American citizens of their most precious right.
Those rather strong comments came only a day after a trial in federal court over the controversial Texas voter ID law began. Voter ID laws have taken center stage this year because stricter voting laws are in the works in several battleground states, a fact that worries the Obama campaign and Democrats because such laws seem to disproportionately impact low-income and minority voters. In one state that has new voter ID laws, Pennsylvania, more than 9% of the state's registered voters do not have the proper ID. And in Philadelphia, where the population is majority African-American, that number climbs to 18%. Complicating things further in the Keystone State, the company charged with educating the public about the new voter ID law in Pennsylvania happens to be run by a Romney fundraiser. Take a look at one of their ads, which was pulled after the Philadelphia City paper published a story about the contract.
Your right to vote. It's one thing you never want to miss out on. This year, the law requires that every Pennsylvania voter show a photo ID at the polls. It can be your driver's license, passport, a military ID, or other kind of photo ID. And if you don't want a photo on your ID for religious reasons, no problem. PennDOT can supply you with either. Getting your free ID is simple and easy. Contact us today.
Say what you will about the ad, you gotta love the gentle voice of the narrator.
And also, this comes on the heels, Andrew, of a lawmaker saying on camera that with this new law, it's going to help Romney win the state.
We passed this law, Romney's gonna win Pennsylvania.
Congressman, for me, my problem with this is if you separate the politics, which is impossible out of this, and the interesting timing of it, okay, we don't want to have improprieties at the ballot box. But the fact of the matter is, this is basically a solution, searching for a problem. The fact of the matter is they've shown that voter fraud is so minuscule right now, this is going to turn away so many more people than it's going to actually prevent from abuse, that it just reeks here of opportunism for November. You disagree?
Well, first of all, I'd like to know who's saying that we don't have voter fraud, because that's pretty absurd.
You remember you broke it down for us. It was 99.8%.
Going back to the Bush Justice Department, the rates of being struck by lightning higher than the rates of election fraud.
Yeah, because people don't want to look into it. With all due respect, they don't want to look into it. In 2008, I lost the election, not because of voter fraud. But my day started out by someone saying a funny thing happened to me when I went to vote. I said, Emily, what was that? She said, well, I went out to vote. My ballot was already filled out Democratic. I said, would you come and speak to the press? She said, no, they took care of it. I said, well, how would they take care of it? They gave me a new ballot. In Connecticut, we have ballots that you mark. It's paper. They call it electronic. Then you put it into a machine. And every one of these ballots is fondled by someone before it's given to you.
How does restricting access to the polls change that?
How does asking someone to identify themselves and know that they actually are a legitimate voter? I mean, we have in New Haven, we have a mayor who says illegal aliens should be allowed to vote in city elections.
Okay, but
I mean, hello.
Okay, but regardless of what the mayor says, it's a different issue in that if you look just in Pennsylvania, almost 20% of the largest metropolitan city, if today were the election, couldn't vote. We complain in this country about apathy of voters and the low turnout in elections.
Is it possible?
Do we really want to have the impression here for people, hey, you know what?
So I ride in an airplane, I have to give someone my license, show my picture. And yet when I'm voting for a president to choose who runs the government, we don't have to give an ID. We sometimes don't have to sign in some states.
But voting is a right, Congressman. Shouldn't we err on the side of caution, of protecting the voters, of allowing access, as opposed to the privilege of riding on an airplane?
The difference where you and I disagree is I think that we have a huge amount of fraud. And that's what I think. And I think there's no incentive for the Democratic Party to deal with it.
It's, for me, the type of regulations and where it's happening. The example that was raised by the Attorney General, that you can have basically an ID that you're a gun owner, but you can't use a student ID. I mean, the student ID thing for me is more than a little curious. That, think about it. The youth vote traditionally breaks Democrat. They made a special provision. They wanted to go after students in more than just a few states where this is done. It just, to me, is, if this was really about trying to make the elections as fair as possible, okay. But it seems to be written here that you're going after minority populations and you're going after young people. And to me, that's not what this was really about if they're going out for equity and equity.
I just want voting to be fair and secure, whatever it is. Do you think people should have to sign in when they vote?
Yeah.
Why? Well, some people don't think you should have to sign.
I get the argument, but I think it would have been handled a lot differently if this was just about fair voting. I'll give you the benefit. I mean, I believe that's what you're for, but you've been covering this, Andrew. That's not what we're finding here.
And
look who's writing some of this stuff and who's behind it, for crying out loud. Romney bumblers.
The Legislative Council, the funded conservative causes. We also have not seen any bipartisan committees dealing with voter fraud in any state. It's all been partisan. It's all been legislative.
So Connecticut got rid of poll watchers. You used to have it where you could have someone from either party be in the poll and just watch to make sure it was done fairly. I've had my poll watchers kicked out by the Bridgeport police, and then an hour later they're allowed to come back in because they were legitimate. But what happened during that 20 minutes? So no, I think you have problems, and I think you got to really address them.
All
And
right.
maybe this isn't the way.